Welcome to In the Weeds with experienced attorney Elisa Stewart.
Hello and welcome to In the Weeds with experienced attorney Elisa Stewart. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we'll discuss what you need to know about cannabis law. Elisa, thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, so what led you to choose cannabis law as your kind of niche practice area?
So, two things. One, I started out as a public defender when I started my career back in 1999. And in that role, I had an opportunity to sort of get a first row seat to the devastation that happened as a result of the war on drugs. And that piqued my interest in cannabis because it was used as a tool to penalize certain people and to open the doorway for searches and seizures when that otherwise wouldn't have a basis to do so. The second reason was because I understood there was a medicinal benefit to cannabis. When I was young and working in New York City, I think I was working in a restaurant for college. I had a very close friend who had HIV for a long time and then came down and it became AIDS. And another friend that we worked with used to put himself in a great deal of risk to go and be able to purchase cannabis illegally in very bad neighborhoods in New York City. Mm-hmm. And he did that because it made our friend feel better and less anxious, and he could eat, and it extended his life. And so because of that, I took a big interest in cannabis for those two reasons.
Yeah, those are very good reasons. Can you provide an overview of the current legal status of cannabis in the U.S. and how it varies by state, specifically in Washington and New York?
California, in New York, yes. Cannabis is always changing. The regulatory framework is always changing, and state by state it changes as well. But what we're looking at right now is for medicinal purposes, we have, it looks like about 47 states that are open for medicinal purposes of cannabis. And in addition to that, there's 3 U.S. territories and D.C., the District of Columbia. And for adult use, there's about 24 states right now, 2 U.S. territories and D.C. So there's still a lot of change happening, and we expect to see that grow again this year and change this year.
Do you have a sense on when you think it might be federally legal? Because it feels like that's coming at some point, but or do you think that it's far away?
That process has started. The Biden administration asked the DEA to start their process to back up. It was the Department, HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, that made a recommendation that they did their own scientific review and determined that we should move cannabis, right, to a different schedule than Schedule 1.
Right.
Currently, Schedule 1 means that there's no medicinal benefit whatsoever, no purpose to cannabis whatsoever that would be helpful to anyone. And we simply know that's not true. So this process has started administrative at the request of the Biden administration. The DEA now is in the process. They have also recommended that it change to a Schedule 3. And they've opened the process for comments. And the comments, there was tons and tons of comments. And now there'll probably likely be a hearing to determine, which way these agencies determine cannabis should be rescheduled. And so that's the administrative process. Now, there's a simpler route. The simpler route would be that Congress acted, but that has been, it seems, more challenging than starting on this administrative process.
Yeah, I'm in Colorado, and it's been a while since it was legalized here.
Yeah,
we have a reputation here. We're also starting to see more legalized mushrooms.
Yes.
Do you see that increasing as well throughout the country?
I do, and here's the reason why. There is really good research on that right now, and how that can help somebody in the therapeutic process. And for veterans who are suffering PTSD, it can shorten the therapeutic process and make that much more beneficial. And that kind of relief is so needed. And so I completely support that. I do hope that moves faster than cannabis. And that would be a great thing as well.
Yeah, you think it'd have to move faster. Hopefully, like cannabis is like the guinea pig, and then stuff like
we have 47 states now who are doing some form of cannabis, right?
Yeah.
And we're still federally illegal. It just really shocks the mind a little bit.
It's so weird. It's really hard to. Yeah, you're right. Shocks the mind. It's like hard. It's like, wait, what? It's hard to comprehend.
I know.
What are some of the common misconceptions about the cannabis industry that you would like to dispel?
The biggest misconception from my perspective is the misconceptions around stoner, like the stoner culture. And I know that there's people who've made that cool, and I think it is cool for a certain age group.
Sure.
But for the vast majority of the population, there's sort of a negative implication. One, that people who are like stoners are lazy or non-productive or they don't work very hard or whatever it is. None of that is true. Cannabis doesn't have any impact on mental acuity. It doesn't have any impact on lowering your productivity. And in fact, the fastest growing population of people using cannabis right now are senior citizens. And that's because they have figured out it helps with aches and pains. And the big plus is it is a sleep aid. Probably the best known or kept secret about cannabis that I'm aware of is that it is really a tremendously effective sleep aid.
I can attest to that. I do. It helps me because I definitely suffer from insomnia here and there, and it works, and it's not Ambien, and it makes me happy to be able to use something that is not addictive and is not like hurting me in that same way.
And you're not groggy in the morning.
No,
right?
No,
right. No hangover.
Well, I am, but that's because my toddler wakes me up so early. Different reason.
That's different. Yeah. But no, it's a great sleep aid. I can't recommend it enough.
How does one begin to build a cannabis business? What does that journey look like when working with an experienced attorney such as yourself?
Planning. I can't emphasize it enough. It's depending on what jurisdiction you're in. So in California, if you're in California, you're going to have 2 jurisdictions that you need to satisfy in order to just get licensed. And that's going to be at the local jurisdiction level. You have to do usually something that's called a conditional use permit, or it can be a ministerial permit. Both have different levels of complexity. One's quite easy, one's more complicated. And then you still have to go to the state to get your state license. Now, New York has made that a little less complicated. Really, the local jurisdiction has little impact. Like, they're setting the hours. They can say what time a business can be open to and what time they have to close at. They can tell you where it can be, where the zoning is, where it's appropriate to have these businesses, but they don't really impact anything else like in California they do. If you don't have your local permit, you can't go get your state license. So these types of complexities in different states and different jurisdictions are something that an attorney can help with. They can help you sort of plan out what your business plan is going to be. Somebody who's really fluent in the licensing and permitting process, who understands what the operational concerns can be once you open, what sort of money you're looking at, what the activities you could engage in. All of these are things that somebody who has experience in the cannabis industry can help with, right? Particularly lawyers.
What advice do you have for cannabis entrepreneurs and business owners who are starting a business or who are currently in business?
It is a very complex area to open a business in. So cannabis is subject to so many regulations and so much oversight from different, agencies that really you have to be detail specific. And if you yourself are an entrepreneur and you see yourself as a visionary, you might not be the type of person to get into the weeds, right? To be like, you need to know all the details. That's where, you can have consultants or you can have an attorney come in and help you with those details that need to get done. So you're going to need somebody who's detail oriented, who's familiar with the regulatory environment that you're going to be operating in. And you're going to need to have startup money, right? That's necessary. So you're going to need money for licensing, money for counsel, money for, CPA or an accountant. You're going to need money for your build out, money for inventory. So these are some of the startup costs that you'll need. And my advice is really to plan it out. Make sure that what you're taking on is something that you can accomplish. So I've had clients who have said, we're going to be vertically integrated and we want to do every activity that you can do. And some clients say, I just want to have a dispensary. And you just want to make sure that whatever your client is trying to accomplish, that it's something that they can, that they don't bite off more than they can chew. And sometimes setting the brakes is the most important part of your job.
Yeah, it's because I feel like a lot of the dispensaries around me change quickly. Like they change names, they go under, they change hands, or it's just a totally different operation. And is there anything that you've seen that sort of is a top reason that these businesses might fail? that people could maybe try to avoid?
Some of it, yes. I mean, the biggest hurdle for people is the fact that it's federally illegal, that the cannabis remains on Schedule 1,
Mm-hmm.
and that implicates businesses through an IRS code section called 280E. And what 280E does is it was designed, I think it came out in the 80s, and it was designed to sort of bankrupt businesses that engaged in the illicit drug trade. And the way it bankrupts businesses who engage in the illicit drug trade is that they're not allowed to take any business deductions for their business. So the only thing a cannabis business can deduct is what they spent to get the cost of goods sold, basically. That's what it's called, COGS for short, what they spent for their inventory. And the simplest way to understand this is if you have a dispensary and you purchase inventory, and your inventory is, let's say it's $10 and you sell it for $20. Well, your cost of goods sold that you can deduct is $10. That's it. Nothing else. Mm-hmm. Not your labor, not your metric, not your track and trace, not your security, none of it. You know, how many businesses can operate successfully in that way?
Yeah.
So the fact that businesses, some are operating successfully, these guys are like, they're superpowered. I don't know how to describe it. Like they are like operating at, you know, a very high level of success because they've been able to figure out how to manage 280E. There is a lot of struggle in the cannabis industry, and there will be until that's gone away because you can't access capital, you can't get loans, you have a hard time with banking. So all of these things make it much more challenging to operate a cannabis business than if you didn't have all of this. And when it does become federally legal, that's going to be a huge time, right, to enter the market for people, but it's also going to be a big change for the, you know, industry as a whole because each state operates as its own little market, and all of that's going to change.
Yeah, that's a good point. That for the people who are already in the game, that there's going to be a lot of changes, and hopefully in a good way. You know, hopefully they'll be able to start,
right,
you know, making a little bit more money. What other challenges do cannabis businesses face? You know, maybe that might not come to mind immediately. Like, you know, you think about, okay, banking. You know, we know that you can't use like a credit card at a dispensary, or at least not the ones in here in Colorado. What other challenges do some of these people face when they're trying to get their business rolling?
Some of the biggest challenges is sort of the regulatory overlap that they have to deal with. So beyond those challenges that businesses face generally and those additional challenges that only cannabis businesses face,
right,
there's also this really intense regulatory environment that they operate in. And they have to get permitted or licensed to be able to open. But then beyond that, most states require them to track their product from seed to sale. And so that means that you have to have an inventory team who's very efficient and very good at maintaining your inventory, keeping track of where it goes, when it comes in, where it travels in your facility, and when it exits. And that can be a very intensive requirement for people. And so you need to spend money on the time and energy to train your employees to do that efficiently and to do it right. Because otherwise, if you have inventory issues, then you're stuck in this place where you need to report it to the state, report it to the police. And so these things are additional. This regulatory oversight, and as it relates to track and trace specifically, can be pretty challenging.
Yeah, I'll bet. There are a lot of, when you go to a dispensary, there's a lot of, it feels weird sometimes. You feel like you're, you know, because they have to be so careful with everything, and, you know, you get the security at the front, you get the security when you buy, they have to give you a receipt, and there's like so many little things to remember, and you just have regular old young people be as employees. And so you gotta train them, right? You just got to train them well.
Yeah, you do. You have to train them well. That's right.
How important is it that entrepreneurs and business owners work with an attorney to start their business or to keep their cannabis business in compliance with state and federal laws?
I work with a number of businesses that use attorneys, obviously, but I've certainly sort of gone through licensing rounds where I've got familiar with other people who are working and applying for licenses in the same time period I was applying for licenses. And they were working with consultants, not attorneys. There are people who sort of like their business is to write applications and to write, you know, with a gear towards getting licensed. But it can always be helpful to work with an attorney because beyond just the permitting and licensing, there is, like I said, this regulatory framework that exists that they're going to have to operate within. And more often than not, the regulatory framework can be brand new. Like no one really knows how it's going to be interpreted by the courts or by administrative agencies. And so you're working in a very gray area until you get a decision from a court that clears it up, right? But while you're in that gray area, it really helps to have the benefit of an attorney who's seen this perhaps in a different industry or regulatory environment in other businesses and how, or other states, as an example, and how things were interpreted in that state, and can apply that knowledge to your situation. And that's why I would recommend having an attorney for that basis, because it is really our job to know the law and to interpret it for our clients.
I'm sure you've talked to plenty of people who are either skeptical or straight up don't really agree with the legality of marijuana. What is their reason as a general rule? What are they afraid of?
Well, if you grew up at a time like I did, I think I was just inundated with like the 2 eggs frying in the pan.
Oh, yeah.
On drugs.
I remember that. Yeah.
I mean, none of us paid attention to it. We did what we wanted, right? But
Yep.
but it did, like, as you get older and you have children and you worry about their getting into trouble and you worry about all these things you didn't worry about when you were a kid, but you have these tropes running in your brain. That's
Right.
one of them.
That's a
But
good point.
another example is communities that are impacted by the war on drugs. I was in a small Central Valley town, largely Hispanic, and we were talking about opening up their jurisdiction to cannabis because they could use the revenue from the cannabis businesses. But they were very reluctant because it had such a huge impact on their community that they were frequently searched, right? If,
Right.
They were pulled over and somebody said, "Oh, I smell cannabis," everybody's out of the car. They were frequently harshly impacted by these drug laws that made them very, very reluctant to get in. And so what they kind of did was they did it in stages. They decided that ultimately they didn't want to have a dispensary within their borders initially. They wanted to try other cannabis activities, and that was fine. So we started there, and we had like delivery, and we had manufacturing and cultivation. And then they finally decided they were ready. They wanted to have a dispensary. And now, the mayor of that town will come with me to other new jurisdictions to explain her experience with cannabis and how it impacted her town and her community. So I think sometimes it's just unlearning things, right? Like things that have happened that are very real and worrisome, but acknowledging that it's changed now. It's safer, It's okay, it's acceptable. So
The world is a little different. The drugs, like it's not necessarily what we remember with like you said, 2 eggs frying in a pan and dare and just say no and all the stuff we grew up on. Yeah, that's really interesting. What would you say sets your firm apart in the area of cannabis law?
Well, I would say that what I like to do is when I do any sort of law, I really like to understand what I'm doing, and particularly within the cannabis industry, where some of what my clients wanted me to do was draft standard operating procedures, or we had to draft them for licensing or permitting. It's really hard to draft a standard operating procedure if you've never, ever participated in the operation, right?
Yeah.
And so I spent time with these businesses that I represented, and I have actually planted cannabis, I've harvested cannabis, I've trimmed cannabis, like I've done it all right now, right? I have not operated any manufacturing equipment. I don't know how to do that, but pretty much everything else I can figure out, right? And in that way, I have a different knowledge. And I would really encourage other attorneys to do that as well. Like the better you know the business, because you've worked it yourself a little bit, you've spent enough time in the operations to understand it, just the better your practice is going to be, the more valuable your advice is going to be because it's real.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for all the other attorneys that might be listening to this show.
Yeah.
Don't give away your trade secrets.
No, too late.
Too late. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to In the Weeds with experienced attorney Elisa Stewart. For more information or to connect with Elisa, you can visit stewartlawpc.com. And of course, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments. Elisa, so great to talk with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Pleasure was mine.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.